Thank you, Ching, so much for setting the stage for the day. Those were some really helpful framing points on the opportunity and some of the ways we could begin to operationalize demand flexibility and start growing that. With that, I have the incredible pleasure of hosting the Fireside chat. This joke was courtesy Ben. We don't have fire, but it's going to be very illuminating is what he said. So I'm just using that joke. So if it works, it's Ben's. If not, it's mine. So with that, I would invite my colleagues to the dais. Thank you. All right, as they make their way, they're all going to provide some opening kind of introductory comments. But before we go in there, it's as you all know, many of them are very familiar in the energy scene. So President Reynolds from PUC, Commissioner Skinner from the Energy Commission, but also who has been a former assembly member, but also senator, and has worked a lot on demand flexibility as an important part in her career in the legislature. Also, I would consider my friend and colleague, Mark, from CAISO. We went through the 2020 crisis together and became really good friends after that. And my mentor, Commissioner McAllister, who continues to inspire and educate me on how best to do these things. So with that, I would welcome each one of you to provide your opening comments, starting with Commissioner McAllister.
Will you remind people about Slido?
Yeah, okay, please.
Okay, sorry, just a reminder, if you have questions queued up, there might be a time for questions and answers. Slido, just type in that code at slido.com, and it should be also in the agenda on the app.
So I will say the questions here.
I'll just hold the button down here. Great. Well, thanks, Vice Chair Gunda. Really, I know you say I'm a mentor. You're very kind, but your skill set is just really amazing in terms of just sort of technical understanding, and then also just vision and collaboration, and just really bringing your whole self to these issues. And that's what I think unlocking demand flexibility really takes. Is we have to think sort of more broadly than we're used to, and we have to really embrace a little bit of uncertainty about a resource that by its nature is disaggregated. And so I think that's part of the challenge and part of the sort of cross-cutting character of demand flexibility. I did want to just, my framing comments, I want to just keep pretty high level, and I have a couple of stories along the way, but basically want to just sort of frame it for our conversation, our fireside chat. So Energy Commission was formed back in the 70s to do energy efficiency. It's one of those, forecasting, power plant siting, and energy efficiency. That was, that has been our core, one of our core functions for 50 years, and remains so. And energy efficiency continues to be a critical resource. It makes all of our other problems smaller. If we use our resources better, we have to build out less infrastructure, the transmission, distribution, supply, traditional supply. Load flexibility is really a key part of that. So load flexibility is sort of now incorporated into what I think of as the sort of digital, modern digital version of energy efficiency. We have to be more efficient, but we also have to build in communications and controls where appropriate to be able to really unlock this resource that we're talking about. So, we can do this. I mean, I think, I'm sure Commissioner Skinner will talk about Art Rosenfeld as her mentor, and I also worked with him at LBL back in the day. And really, he was sort of part of the small first-generation, inventors of the discipline of energy efficiency, of really the craft of energy efficiency. And I think that we need a lot of those sort of craft-like skills to build this infrastructure that we need to build, that Ben and Vice Chair and Chair talked about, to really unlock the potential of load flexibility. I'd also point out Carl Blumstein here in the first row, who's also part of that first generation of energy efficiency visionaries. So Art actually, part of what I focus on is really the demand side of this equation, the sort of day in, day out load modifying, really to flatten load curves and really be able to hand the CAISO a better load shape to start with that they can then plan around. And so this habitual, maybe time of use, prices inspired day in and day out load flexibility is part of our core, one of our core responsibilities at the Energy Commission. I mentioned the three, so standards was part of what we were formed to do. It's building standards, appliance efficiency standards, and now, and load management standards. Those were the three original sort of standards-making, demand-side authorities, regulatory authorities that the Energy Commission had from the get-go 50 years ago. You read the Warren-Alquist Act, it's prescient to talking about load management standards. So ART actually tried to develop load management standards and had a rulemaking. I don't know how many of you were sort of around when this happened. Those of you who've been in the demand flex space for a long time might remember this when Jackie Fanasteel was the chair of the Energy Commission. And he was going to regulate thermostats to be communicating and bidirectional so that the utility, if needed, could reach into people's homes and adjust their thermostats. Right? And when he was doing that, we were in the analog era, and it was way ahead of its time. Fox News got a hold of it and said, oh my God, Big Brother, you know, just raised a huge stink. And it blew up, right? And, you know, I think it's useful to sort of remember that history and understand now that we are fully in the digital age. You know, we all carry around these computers in our pockets. We're basically tracked all the time. This is small potatoes, right? To be able to sort of automate around behavior and functionality of individual devices to aggregate them and make them into a resource in the grid and save the consumer a bunch of money. So this is doable, right? We have the tools to do this, low-cost communications and controls. So to do the demand side, we really we have a full toolbox. And there are incredible solutions that you're going to hear about today on the panels from the Energy Commission, but also from many stakeholders out there who are doing amazing things. At the Energy Commission, I said load management standards. We've got a proceeding there that's really going to help automate and unlock the resource, which I'm happy to talk about. We have the flexible demand appliance standards that Ching mentioned. We've done pool controls, so the next pool control you get in your pool, if you're lucky enough to have one, it's going to have connectivity and controllability that's automatable through the web. So that every single one that's sold in the state will have that functionality. We need to take advantage of that. So I'll reveal my age a little bit here, but I've been in the energy business since 1990, and this moment is kind of what I've always dreamed of. We have, these ideas are going mainstream. We have incredible technologies. We have an opportunity of the build out of the system that Vice Chair mentioned, where we're going to be building many gigawatts of new supply at all scales. And connecting an incredible amount of electric loads. And each of those new investments is an opportunity. So we just need to make sure we're taking advantage of that opportunity. I think we'll talk about challenges in a little bit, right? So I won't go into the challenges, there's plenty of those. But I think from just wrapping up, I think what I think about from the perspective of Energy Commission as a standards-making body, as a regulatory agency, is what is needed, what must the Energy Commission do that nobody else can do, that we have the authority to do, and that it's really a market barrier that we can fix using either our bully pulpit or actual regulations. Interoperability. I think there's some complexity when you talk about what should be at the retail level, what should be sort of through the utilities or with third parties, with individual customers. What should sort of that ecosystem look like to really help identify and harness all these demand-side resources? And what should the CAISO do? What's sort of most relevant for the bulk power grid? And how does that handoff take place? How does an aggregation of retail devices behind customer meters, how does that present to the CAISO so that they can really know that it's going to show up and have it actually influence how they go about operating the system day to day? So whether that's and I think the dividing line between sort of the load modifying resources where it really does impact the load shape itself day in and day out, improve load factors, et cetera, optimize the use of the distribution grid, and then push it up into the transmission. How does that, we need to make sure that that is sort of quantifiable and really, aggregatable, but also not count on those resources that are operating day in and day out, and changing their dispatch, not count on those for, say, a shed event that the CAISO then maybe on a hot summer day would need resources to shift or shed. So being accountable and sort of eyes wide open, understanding what resources are there to be shifted, to be modulated, and which ones are not, so that they can be actually then further exploited for for reliability purposes. So I think a number of questions there I've kind of laid out, but I'm super optimistic about our ability to do this. I want to just thank the Vice Chair and the Chair and Commissioner Houck and President Reynolds for their leadership on this issue. It's the bifurcation discussion, I think, maybe set us back a little bit back in the day, because it sort of it balkanized this conversation. I'm really happy to have the ability to have an integrated conversation and really an all-of-government approach, all-of-energy sector approach to be able to solve this and do well, as Vice Chair said, and I think the Chair said, decarbonize, provide downward pressure on rates, and buttress reliability. We can do all three of those things with load flex if done right. So really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'll pass it back to the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner McAllister. We'll go to, from you on the planning side all the way down to, where the rubber meets the road in actually operationalizing. So welcome Mark to provide his opening.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to collaborate and discuss this important topic. As the system operator, my CEO, Ellie Manzer, has coined the phrase, we are the Department of Physics and Economics. And on the physics side, it is that balancing, that constant balancing of supply and demand. And traditional operations is having the demand be what it be, and then finding how to dispatch the supply to balance it. We're kind of turning that upside down now. We've now got supply that is not so much controllable, but is available when it's available. And we have to re-ask the question, how do we modify demand or flex demand to align with the available supply? That's a hard shift. And when you don't get that balance correct, you resort to things like involuntary load shedding, which I think is, at the end of the day, is a failure of the planning and the operation at that point. So how do we do this better? How do we do this in a more cohesive and controlled way? So I look to the demand flexibility as a true opportunity. Today, as indicated by the duck curve, we are now roughly ramping out over 3 hours, 20,000 megawatts over 3 hours every day, okay? 10 Diablo Canyons dropping off the system over 3 hours every day. And we have to find supply to come in and make that up over the same 3 hours. That's the balancing act. Traditionally, what do? We ramp up gas-fired resources. Okay, that's about 10,000 megawatts that we can ramp up. Hydro, 3,000 megawatts. Imports, we can turn around, usually around 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts. And that's been how we've been doing it. Now we've got a new tool, 10,000 megawatts of storage. So charging that battery up in the middle of the day when you got that surplus energy in the belly of the duck, and then discharging it in the evening to be your supply. Great tool, absolutely fabulous tool. In 10 more years, we're gonna have probably 30,000 megawatts of supply ramping out, and we're gonna have increased demand. Electrification, electric vehicles, data centers, and that ramp, what is 20,000 today, could be 30,000, 35,000. So we have to now look to see how are we going to do that in a secure way, in a reliable way, and from the operator perspective, in a way that we can rely on. And what I mean by that is, unfortunately, when I dispatch a gas resource, I have a high degree of confidence it's going to deliver, okay? If I charge my battery, I have a high degree of confidence that I can discharge that battery. Through the Western Energy Imbalance Market, I have a high degree of confidence what I can move around the Western grid on a 5-minute by 5-minute basis. Great tool. I need, as an operator, that same level of confidence that or predictability, that when I dispatch load or expect load to be responsive to prices or signals or emergency events, we know what we're going to get and how much we're going to get, and we can do that in a reliable manner. That allows us to balance the supply and demand. The Amber Alert that we described earlier in 2022 was an indication that we can change demand, and we can do it through signals. Is that the best way to do it? No. But it is an indicator that there is demand flexibility out there. Now, how do we harness it? How do we do it better? And how do we do it in a more predictable way? And I'll just stop with one anecdote, and that was when we did that Amber Alert, our operators were stressed, okay? They felt like they were running out of supply, and their next step was probably involuntary load shedding, okay? So we prevented that. The Amber Alert came out. They started to see the load drop. I called the operators. What did they tell me? How much load's going to drop? Now we've got high frequency. So I illustrate that because it's the predictability, it's knowing how much you're going to get. And we didn't know, frankly, how much response we were going to get when we had that Amber Alert. It helped, but we didn't know how much. So we need a mechanism, business mechanism, and a physical mechanism that allows us to know and predict and be able to expect how to balance now demand to match the supply. So it is an untapped resource. This is a great conversation. It is the time to have it because you've got large amounts of load growth over the next 10 years. It would be a waste if we don't make that new load flexible to the system.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think that, from Commissioner McAllister's points to yours, just kind of the opportunity to what you need as a system operator from managing physics and economics, as you mentioned. So from there, we want to go to President Reynolds. I think, President Reynolds, you had multiple roles over your career as a public servant, including, being in the governor's office and helping us right through the 2020 crisis. I remember the Excel sheets and calling for megawatts, or negawatts, people, just asking people to turn off their lights. And you have transitioned in no enviable way to one of the toughest jobs in the state, to be the president of the PUC, as we were coming into kind of a coincidental crisis points on affordability, reliability, long-term planning. And you have a unique perspective coming from both the governor's office, but also as a rate regulator and thinking about affordability every day. Welcome your opening comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I want to start just by thanking CEC for hosting and also to UC Davis for having us here today, and just reflect on the fact that Commissioner McAllister recognized some of the long-term, really, giants and mentors in the demand flexibility space that we have, and some of whom are here today. But we also have a lot of young people, and I think that being at UC Davis really is kind of helpful to set the stage for us because we're facing so much change, and we really do need motivated, excited young people to kind of come up and really start tackling these issues. We're also facing an era where we have a lot of new technology, and so another reason that, we just welcome all of our new developing leaders into this space, and seeing a room full of people today across all generations really is exciting. So thank you, and I'm excited to be here. All right, so we heard some background, and I really appreciate following Commissioner McAllister and then Mark talking about the operational aspect of load flexibility. I think what I'll add, and just to think about as we continue in this discussion, is the grid aspect, especially the distribution system, and how the distribution system needs to be ready and available to accommodate flexible load, and especially large amounts of flexible load, as well as the cost. And so where is the value that we're getting, and how do we think about payment for that value? Because the cost of everything we're doing, including technology advances, starting with smart meters, comes from all of us. It comes from customers. And so we need to think about maximizing the value of demand flexibility so that we are seeing benefits to customers in terms of providing alternatives to other sources of supply and avoiding upgrades to the grid anytime we can. So just to think about context, I really do want to focus on climate change and the fact that that is driving a lot of the thinking here in this space. And that means not just in terms of mitigating climate change, because a lot of what we're doing is focusing on electrification for the purpose of reducing reliance on fossil fuels for the electric sector. And so electrification means heat pumps, it means electric vehicles, and that's all new load added to the system. Of course, that is part of the reason we're here today, because that is flexible load. It's not like turning on the lights or even cooking in the morning, in the evening when you get home from work. A heat pump is a very flexible appliance. So it gives us a lot of space to talk about the issues that we're dealing with here. But the other part of climate change is the impacts of climate change. And so at the same time, we're increasing load in a very variable way. We are also seeing impacts of climate change that show up, and most directly that we've faced is, and we've already been talking about it this morning, is extreme heat waves. And in particular, west-wide extreme heat waves. So that our reliance on other Western states at times of grid strain in the summertime, we can't always bring in unlimited imports. Those imports start being constrained, and I think that's what we've already heard Mark talk about a little bit. And so the idea of using demand flexibility as a tool in those instances is really valuable and important, but we also have to think about how that, first of all, the cost, and then also how that matches our baseline of demand flexibility. When we have a system where we need to rely on demand flexibility for those extreme events, it has to be predictable and certain, and it has to be below baseline, so that we have all those resources that we can bring on, but we have this demand flexibility sitting there waiting for extreme events, and we know we can call it, and we know it will be certain. And then the final point I want to make as an opening remark is how we think about grid capacity. So again, an era of change. Grid capacity has not been a huge issue in the past, where there's been kind of predictable load coming on and time to upgrade the grid so that it's ready for any kind of energization request that a customer makes. We're really at a different place now, where we have large loads requesting energization to the distribution system owner. And that could be a data center, it could be a vehicle charging bank. And so we've been thinking about things like flexible service connections, which I see as kind of a complement and really incorporated into this demand flexibility discussion, where a customer can say, I don't need all of this load. I don't need my maximum load today. I'm going to need it in 10 years. So I'm willing to agree to a flexible service connection so that my use of the grid is limited until upgrades can be made. That's a way that customers can save money. We can save money on connections to the grid, and it's done in a predictable way. Because you can't have a customer that comes on and says, well, most days I will reduce my capacity, but on Thanksgiving, I'm going to use my full capacity. Then you have to build the grid to the full capacity, and all of the investments have to be made. So I want to really make the point in my introduction of just that we're facing a lot of uncertainties, but that's also what makes this area challenging and interesting and worthy of attention. So really appreciate being here today.
Thank you, President Reynolds. To close off, we have Commissioner Skinner, but I wanted to just kind of, I think we have only Commissioner Skinner on the dais who touched two branches of the government. I wouldn't put it past her to not touch the third one at some point. But with that, I think just, Commissioner Skinner, you have really shepherded a lot of legislation around demand flexibility and more demand-side resources. And as you come from the legislature into this space of kind of the executive branch, a commission, would welcome your kind of remarks on how you see the landscape here.
Thank you, Vice Chair Gunda. Really pleased to be able to serve with you, and very honored that Governor Newsom appointed me just this January to the Energy Commission. And like President Reynolds, I'm very happy that this is at UC Davis, because what we're discussing is going to need all the new creative minds to help us achieve it, and I think it's essential. And I'm also very appreciative to the Vice Chair for bringing together our different agencies, because it is also going to require us working together to pull it off. I have so much to think about and say on this topic, so how do I condense it? So when I was in the legislature, I did many of the policies, not all, but many of the policies that are sort of guiding us today, or maybe put us in this circumstance. Back in 2009 or 10, I did the bill that set the PUC on the path to have our power purchasers, when they purchase generation, to also purchase storage. And while we did not yet have our renewable portfolio standard of 33%, and we certainly didn't have SB 100 that now says we're going to have 100% renewable electricity, it was clear that we were moving in that direction, and that we didn't have unlimited amounts of geothermal, which was going to produce our renewable energy for 24/7, that we are going to need to figure out how to balance the load of our solar and wind generation. So that was the point of energy storage. And we just announced we now have 13,500 megawatts of energy storage online. That's utility grade energy storage online in California. Now, that's not demand management per se, but it is a similar concept. So Commissioner McAllister referenced my mentor, Art Rosenfeld, and of course I'm looking in the room at Carl Bloomstein, who I served with at the City of Berkeley Energy Commission starting back in 78 or 79, and starting to toy with these kind of thoughts. We used different terms, though. We didn't use demand management. We didn't use, but whatever. Anyway, point being that Art earlier in the 70s was looking at the projection that California was going to need 100 more power plants, and at that point they were saying nuclear, up and down the coast in order to meet the electricity demand. And this was at a point where we weren't even trying to electrify. So the state of California, many people, but Art also, in doing the energy efficiency policies, got us to that we didn't have to build those power plants. So thus while we didn't necessarily reduce rates over time, we reduced the amount of electricity we needed to meet our needs through our efficiency policies. So, as Commissioner McAllister mentioned, we have to continue to keep that first and foremost. But now we are electrifying. Now we know we're going to need more electrons. But do we need the amount of electrons that we might project. Do we need to actually produce the amount of electrons that we're projecting for peak? And I say no. And we need the moonshot of how we're going to meet that peak without doing that. And that's what I think the whole purpose of today's discussion is, that how do we do that? And is it flex demand? Is it efficiency? Is it a mixture? Or is it things like the first presenter talked about how, peak is people come home from work. Now, of course, they don't even necessarily all come home from work. They're already there, but whatever. They start using more than their computer around 5 o'clock or so up until whatever time, maybe 4 o'clock. So maybe that's many, many households plugging their car into their house and having that EV battery power their house. Because the EV battery capacity has the potential to power a house for 2 days. Compared to the Tesla battery pack that you might buy for your house, the Tesla battery pack gives you about 13.5 kilowatt hours. Average, the EV batteries are between 50 to 200 kilowatt hours. So now, is that alone going to do it? No, but I throw it out because that's the way I think we have to start thinking. And how do we do this? And now, and I say we agencies have to work together because I can appreciate, if I'm in Mark's role, I'm going to look at, I want to know that this is going to deliver. I want to know because he's got to keep the grid reliable. And if I'm in President Reynolds' role, I'm thinking, okay, is this, are people really going to plug in? How do we rely on it? And so that's why I say that we got to have that moonshot. How do we create that system or structure that gives us that ability to feel confident about our shifts and loads and our demand flexibility? And to me, it's essential because if we try to build generation and transmission to the level of whatever we assume peak is going to be, the cost, system-wide cost, is so high. And I think we just need to be smarter about it. And we have the ability to be smarter about it. And so maybe we don't have that, put our hands in that confidence at this very moment in time, but I think collectively we could. And the last reference I'd make is that in 2017, I did the bill SB 338, and that was to allow, it said, and here I am on the CEC, it said CEC, CAISO, and PUC work together and do your best to figure out how to meet peak without relying on fossil fuel and new generation. And that, I was motivated at that point by air quality. SB 100 didn't pass until the year after, so we hadn't yet set our full goal of electrification. But I was looking at, okay, can we meet peak a different way? Now, I know that our agencies have coordinated some on these topics, but now I think we just have to elevate that to a whole new level.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Skinner. So there's a number of questions coming, and I would love to honor the questions coming from the participants here. But let me kind of invoke the spirit of being vulnerable, because I think a part of difficult conversations and trying to move forward is trying to figure out, everybody feels like they're aware of the issues, and so we can find common paths and common directions, and we reduce the information asymmetry, right? So I think many of you are, in this room are in leadership roles, but particularly the four of you have such big powers to kind of figure out how to move the state forward. So with that, you already started this conversation, but from each one of you, as you look at your statutory responsibility and recognizing that we have three primary forces here. We have legislature that's setting laws. We have the agencies trying to use those statutory responsibilities to devise regulations. And then we are also trying to figure out how to use our regulatory structures to allow for maximum market participation and allow the markets to function as well as they can. So with that, if you could offer from your perspective what you see as your needs to get behind demand flexibility. Mark already mentioned the single biggest thing is I just need something reliable and responsive and I ask for it. So if you could just kind of talk about what are some of the barriers, needs, particularly needs that you see, and that each one of you can help each other on those issues, and yeah, begin the conversation. So anybody who wants to begin.
I'll jump in first, and I can be quick, and I think it'll give others the opportunity to build on this. But yeah, no. So I'm going to be like the, the annoying big sister. Yeah, and I mean, Vice Chair, you mentioned kind of, having programs that invite participation, and we really want to maximize participation. But I think Commissioner Skinner hinted on this in her remarks that we also need verification, measurement, and verification. And it's really important, and it's something that is not always welcomed, I think, by participants who really want to do innovative and, try new things. But as you saw in from Ching's slides, which is really an excellent presentation that walked through some of the history of load flexibility, the PUC's been doing these types of programs for decades, as well as the CEC, obviously. But so the PUC developing programs with ratepayer funding. And we've realized that the verification and measurement component is really important. When we started including batteries, behind-the-meter batteries in our SGIP program, we did a first round, and then we realized that, and this is part of our climate efforts to get batteries in people's homes, we realized that the batteries we had provided, the incentives, had increased GHGs. So it had led to an increase in global warming pollutants. And so we realized that we can't just do this and assume that these technologies are going to be used in the right way. We really do have to have measurements and tracking and methods to make sure that there's either programmed or program requirements or incentives to make sure that the technology performs in the way that we need it to perform.
I think the bifurcation that happened probably set in motion some good things and some bad things. One of I think the good things is that I think we have to look at load not uniformly. In other words, there are some loads that are easy to, like you say, measure and verify, although that is challenging in of itself. It's not like a generating resource where you can see what was produced. Your production is, and thinking about it as a supply resource actually is somewhat detrimental because you have to figure out, okay, what would have you consumed but for the ask of being responsive. I think where we need maybe to build out a little bit more is at the other side of the opportunity, and that is, maybe not everything needs to be under measurement and verification. Maybe we need to think more about, especially with AI and predictability, can we predict with a fair amount of confidence what's going to happen? And maybe we don't need to directly measure and verify. That's harder. That's a harder thing to do. It's a little bit harder as an operator, but if we knew that and we knew what the signal they were listening to was, whether it be prices or system conditions, and we can get them that signal, and we could rely on that predictability, maybe measurement and verification is not the only pathway. So I think we have to maintain a openness to both of those paths, and that's why I think it's kind of a byproduct of the bifurcation. But I think we've only kind of tried to build out one side of this, other than programs that are emergency-based. Those are kind of predictability, and they're getting rates for response.
Great, yeah, great answer. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, President Reynolds. Yeah, so I couldn't agree more, and I think we have an incredible opportunity for rigor in impact assessment and EM&V. And we've done some of that. I think with sort of the big data era that we're in, we actually have the opportunity to develop sort of standard methodologies that use rigorous assessment, like participant, non-participant assessments, with outcomes that are statistically sort of valid and can be used for planning. And so the Energy Commission has been funding quite a bit of that over the last few years, and I think the pervasiveness of AMI and interval metering and the access to that data and sort of the ability to use that data for these kinds of efforts can really help with this unpacking of the various impacts of these investments at all scales, right, at all levels of the system. And you'll hear from Octopus Energy, you'll hear from Energy Hub and others in the sessions through the course of the day that have developed compelling solutions that kind of leverage innovation to get at this. For example, we have a carbon signal. I'm sure we can improve it, but we have a signal of what the carbon content of the grid is, I believe every 15 minutes, probably more than that, but definitely that's a signal. For example, if we had an interoperability standard, say, that leveraged that signal, and that was out there automating modulation of loads, load-based resources, demand-side resources, and that was sort of an organizing principle that was throughout the state, that's something that could be assessed rigorously, and that the CAISO could actually probably use to understand, okay, here's what we think this is going to look like tomorrow, and here's what we think that automation is going to look like. If emissions reductions is our primary goal, and we can decide, whether it is or not, or how much it is, then that's an organizing principle that if it were pervasive across the state, we could actually begin to really get grounded in terms of what is flexing day in and day out, what's not available for that event-based dispatch, so that we're not double counting and we are being rigorous in a way that California requires. And I agree with President Reynolds that many other places are not as rigorous, so that it's a little more hand-wavy and a little less grounded. And so that's not going to be good enough for California. And so as the Energy Commission, okay, should I develop an interoperability standard that incorporates some of these ideas? And in a way, the CAISO, I think, is our client, right? We have to develop the ground and line the playing field and really produce an ecosystem that works and that planning can rely on, that dispatch, operation of the system in real time, right, can rely on. And so so those are some of the challenges we have, but I think we have a toolbox that really can rise to the challenge. And then lastly, I would say, if you think about batteries, that S-chip example is a great one. We, in the building code, actually, we have compliance credit now built in for behind-the-meter load flexibility, right? So if you put in a battery, you put in a load-flexible water heater, other measures that have load flex, you get some, if you're a builder, you get some compliance credit. So maybe you can have more, west-facing windows or whatever. So we also, there's a, or not, or you can, just go completely efficient, go zero net. But I think it's a leap of faith to assume that people who have that battery behind the meter are going to dispatch it in a way that benefits the grid, right? And so maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe they keep it floated all the time, at full capacity, so that when the lights go out, they have backup. Or maybe they use it to play the time of use rate. Or maybe they use it around carbon signal. We don't know. And so I think we need to do better, at the sort of automation level of making sure that those resources, if we're counting on them to show up, that they actually have to have some requirements or have some very strong incentives at least, but possibly even requirements and regulations.
Yeah, I would say that building it in versus just, for lack of it, making it voluntary, is going to give us the ability, more confidence in the measurement and the verification. And I probably wouldn't go for the letting the builder add more west windows, because if part of what we're trying to do, if again I'm looking at it like energy efficiency, is how are we going to maximize the benefit we get from each electron that we produce? And we we don't want to have to produce more electrons. So we don't want to necessarily have the builder who smartly had that building with the storage and the potentially even distributed, solar and efficiency and such, then have to then say, oh, okay, now I'll just use more electricity because I have this here, or I'll just use it as backup. Anyway, so I want to get off of it being voluntary, and I'll use two examples. Now, maybe, I don't know, maybe California doesn't have the appetite for this, but Green Mountain, that utility in Vermont, what they did, they saw that as some of their rural areas were increasing their electrification, that the cost for the distribution system and the transmission was so high to expand it in those rural areas, they sent those households, they gave them Tesla battery packs. But the agreement was, all right, we're then connecting to your thermostat, and we are going to be dispatching that battery when we have too much demand, so that your refrigerator, various of your appliances will go on to then be powered by that battery, and we don't have to worry about expanding our distribution system or the transmissions. That's how we're going to handle that. And they did that. And the homeowners, the customers agreed, and that's how it's done. Now, I would hope that Californians would, in the quest to have lower electricity rates, find something like that feasible. But I take the experience of, here I am, I'm the person that did the legislation around Clean Peak, I did the storage, PG&E put a smart meter because I was in part of the pilot where, they didn't ask me, they just replaced my meter, I've got a smart meter. But, do I have one of those kind of thermostats that can take advantage of the smart meter? No. Did I signed up for one of the demand management programs? But I could, I was never home when they would send me the little notice on my phone, so I didn't, I'm thinking, I'm somebody who knows more about this, and I'm like, we should not leave it to this. It should not be that. It should be that, hey, if they needed whatever, my refrigerator or whatever thing was pulling the most demand at that moment at my house to not, then they should have just done it. That's how I looked at it. And so how can we automate these things, and how can we, with efficiency, it's different than we realized, okay, don't just say to everybody, turn off your lights. Get them to use the LEDs because they're, 10 times or more than that efficient than what we used to use. So that, to me, is how we have to look at, we have to build it in the way we have with efficiency.
You want to add? Yeah, please go ahead.
I want to add one thing real quickly. So just building on Commissioner Skinner's comment, so there's a Holy Cross Electric Co-op in Colorado did the same thing and has had several iterations of that behind the meter battery product. And so now I think they charge their customers $15 a month for that battery. They have access to, I believe it's 70% of the capacity. They leave the customer 30% in case of an outage, just that to give the customer comfort. But that's kind of where they've landed. And they're a co-op that serves ski towns and mountain areas of Colorado, and they have a lot of reliability problems during the winter particularly. And so they found that it really has avoided massive costs. It's paid for itself in 18 months or 2 years, something like that. So, and I do believe, I won't name the utility, but I think that one of the big IOUs in California is working on an application. Don't want to talk about that in front of the PUC, but so there is some progress there. I guess, so I just wanted to kind of, I think there's a lot to learn from across the country. And maybe I'll just call out also some of the public owned utilities. Holy Cross is a co-op, and SMUD, has really been working on this for a while as well. But they've encountered some barriers in the marketplace. They had, I think, a contractor that had, a significant number of behind-the-meter batteries that they were looking to dispatch in this way. But that service provider that they had under contract went out of business, and they were kind of left holding the bag. And so I think the market development here is really important, and cross-agency coordination and really understanding the market and the stakeholder, sort of the third-party kind of offerings, and really expecting a high level of maturity in those businesses is something that California really should expect.
Thank you, Commissioner McAllister. So we have 16 minutes left, and there are 38 questions that came in. So obviously, we cannot go through the 38 questions, and I want to honor that we have to stop at 10:20 for this panel because we have our keynote speaker, Senator Becker's here. He has some time constraints, so would love to hear from him before he leaves. So let me try and, let me try. I mean, it doesn't have to be a lightning round. It could be a single question. But let me stitch this together based on the sentiments of what I'm getting here. I'm trying to digest them. So I think what everybody would like to hear is that we're collaborative, right? One, they want to hear that based on the questions, that we're kind of watching each other's work to harmonize our work. That's something that I'm hearing here, which is how do we create that regulatory certainty, investment certainty, so demand flexibility can be there. Second, there is a notion in these questions on how are we pressure testing each other and allowing for diversity of ideas to flourish. That's the second theme that's coming up here. And the third one is how do we reduce confusion to the marketplace by using different terms, different kind of changes. So I think what I would like to, kind of in the spirit of that vulnerable conversation, and I don't think people in this room get to sit in front of the four of you regularly. Is there a way you could construct your answer here to kind of allow for how do we collaborate better? How do we increase the certainty for marketplace? And what do we need from each other as we do this work? Right? How are we allowing for diversity? I'm looking at some of the some of the smiles. So I'm gonna put you all in a difficult position going past the calm statements.
All right, crazy answer. I'm going to do a quickie. Former legislator, I'm going to say, give us some time to do that because we have so many charges on our plate. It's really hard. We've got to respond to all these statutes. So, and many of you are not in the legislature, obviously in this room, but tell the legislature not to give us any more directives for about 2 years or so we could then collaborate together.
Right, the great implementation is the phase we're in. Can I just really quick? Thanks. So simplicity, I think we really need to, we have a lot of offerings, there's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of different pathways for different demand-side resources to emerge and aggregate, and sort of we've sliced and diced. Bifurcation was part of this, but we've sort of sliced and diced, I think, in ways that are confusing. And so if we can distill the offerings down into three, or 3 or 4, some very, have a lot of it be behind the scenes, that would be great. And I think the other thing we could absolutely do, and we have to be a little bit careful about our overlapping jurisdictions and some potential conflicts of interest, but or rather ex parte issues and things like that. But more joint forums, just so we can talk about some of these issues and not sort of artificially separate stakeholder groups and sort of hear the same thing and then take that back and apply our respective authorities and responsibilities in appropriate ways. That I think could be helpful, and I'd love to hear what stakeholders have to say about that. Finally, I just want to call out a former PUC commissioner, Cliff Rechtschaffen, for actually pushing and getting it done in a relatively expeditious way. The change of policy at the Energy Commission that disallowed rate basing of costs for gas infrastructure extension into new developments. The chair mentioned the high percentage now, like the rapid shift from dual fuel homes predominantly to mostly electric new homes. And that's in production building environments that are mostly going to be all electric going forward. And a lot of that is because the builders now would have to share the burden, or cover the burden or cover the cost of the infrastructure extension. And the PUC since then has actually also disallowed the the infrastructure costs for the electric extension into production builds where there are dual fuel homes being built. So those have really helped move the needle towards electrification, and I think the PUC really deserves big kudos for that.
I don't have much to add. We can move on to the next question, but I did want to note on the theme of working together among agencies, we've heard Commissioner Skinner note that she used to have to pass a bill to get us to talk, and now she can just convene a meeting and we'll all come.
I do think the collaborative environment exists, but there is still jurisdictional barriers and responsibilities that may get in the way. I think simplification is important. Leveraging the information we have prices at a locational level, leveraging those. And then I guess last thing would be closing that gap between the customer who's on the distribution system and the operator. How do we close that gap? And I'm not suggesting we should be closer to the customer, but leveraging the community choice aggregators, leveraging the utility, leveraging the information flow, standardizing the information flow so that that confidence level can be built.
Awesome. What are your thoughts on nuclear energy? No, I'm going to just pause. we do have that question, but I'm going to hold off on that for a different forum. Just kind of maybe in kind of coming to this close here, if you could speak to three pieces, lightning round, quickly. Do you think we have a common vision on demand flexibility? Two, what is one thing you want to work on immediately on demand flexibility, either to expand it or pressure test it, whatever it might be? And why should people spend their time here in this room today? Why should people be in this room today and spend the time? Those are the media questions, so I gave it to you, so I can respond after.
I'll jump in. I think everybody knows why they're here because this is a super important problem, so I'm not going to go there. But I think in terms of sort of common vision, I think there are concepts that I think we all agree on, and getting from sort of those concepts to practical implementation is really where we've got to sort of be very pragmatic in how we go forward. I think in conversations with the CalISO and the PUC and others, I think one question, and hopefully this rings true to many of you, certainly if you're in this space, is how are we? What are the criteria? How are we mobilizing the individual loads, load-based resources, behind-the-meter batteries, small resources generally, although, we're talking about data centers as well, which can be very large and flexible. How are we, what's the market mechanism to actually mobilize these things? Are we depending on third-party providers out there to kind of form an independent relationship with the customer and then bid into the CAISO day-ahead? So, use the customer's tariff, their rate to save them money, but also like aggregate it separate from the utility and bid it into the day-ahead market at the CalISO. And these aren't mutually exclusive, but another way is to have third parties or the utility itself be the sort of aggregator, have the utility itself, work with third parties or do it, directly with the customer to mobilize loads and more on a retail level and to help their distribution grid, and then maybe work with the CAISO on a slice of that to put in the day-ahead market or use for dispatch for operations. So those are kind of two different visions, and I think they're still competing a little bit. So are we mostly going to be third parties doing this independently, or are we mostly going to be working through the utilities? And I think that's actually a really important structural question. And it does actually depend on how well we think the utilities would do that if they are going to be in the driver's seats. And I think we have some history that can inform that discussion, but also utilities can evolve and change. And so I think that that tension is there, and I just wanted to acknowledge it.
Yeah, those are really good questions and thought-provoking certainly. I think on the common vision, I think we do have a common vision, but it's complicated, and there are different pain points for all of us. And it's not as easy as it was when we started with this, right? So we were thinking about energy efficiency previously in a system that had a lot of gas plants on it. So using a lot of gas in the system. And then when you think about energy efficiency, that is an electron not used. And when you weren't using an electron back in 1976 in California, you probably were not needing to run a gas plant. But now we're talking about load flexibility. That's not an electron not used. That's an electron used at a different time. And so you still have to have the energy to serve that load at some time. And then we also have so much solar, which has been a great advancement that California has made. And when you don't use electricity at a time when solar is producing, that solar is still going to produce. It's not going to not produce. It's just that you won't be using that electron that it produced. And so you're not necessarily saving any money. And so that makes it complicated. And then we also have the opportunity of all of the new technology, but I'll say the smart meter proceeding at the PUC was one of the most controversial proceedings we have ever had. And we also think about our vision as, okay, we have a person living in a single family house, they buy a heat pump, they have an electric vehicle, they go to work, they could charge at work, or they could charge in their garage when they get home. Not every Californian lives that way. And in fact, we have the lowest home ownership rate in the nation. I think us and one other state. So we have to think about all Californians and all of the utilities we regulate, the load serving entities that serve customers, serve every customer. And they need to serve every customer at the lowest cost possible. And so we think about demand flexibility and the potential of some of our higher income customers shifting their load, providing benefits to the grid, but we also have to think about the impacts on those lower income customers that really don't live in the way that we're envisioning when we think about heat pumps and garages and electric vehicles. So I'll end with that.
So common vision, I think we have a common vision. I don't think we have a common roadmap. And that's where we're kind of all going in maybe different ways how to get there, and maybe not collectively, and that's the challenge. I would say leverage what we do have. We have smart meters, we have some automation now, we have prices, we have mechanisms. Do that for what you have, and then for the new stuff, build out what is the right approach for the new stuff, and maybe separate it in that way, because there's a lot I think we can mine and unlock from the existing capability that we have not. Why should we do this? I think it's pretty straightforward that this is part of the absolute solution to get to the affordable, reliable, clean grid of the future, and if we don't do that, we've lost that opportunity.
So I think where our vision, it's not that the vision varies here, but that I think it's that sense of got to get past it feeling like it's loosey-goosey to knowing that we can rely on it, meaning that that load shift and that flexible, that demand management. And that's where I think there's probably the gap. And if we can figure out how to bridge that gap, and that's why I like the going to making it, build it in. So if we take the efficiency example, and if I use President Reynolds, some of her, some of our low-income residents, say if they're living in multifamily housing, don't have the same level of efficiency of some of our other households because perhaps their multifamily unit has not done, an upgrade in terms of insulation or in terms of their HVAC unit or whatever. So, we still have those gaps even in efficiency. But we built in efficiency, so we have far fewer of those gaps. So I feel, I used an EV example, and you could plug into your house or whatever, but those don't have to be, we shouldn't think of it that only wealthy homeowners or people with garages have that ability. Again, if it's built in if the demand management's built in, then this issue of how many electrons we need we will need less electrons at peak if those electrons are being used during the time solar is maximum generating. And so if we can figure out how to build it in the same way we figured out how to build in efficiency, we can achieve that. What do we want from all of you? Help us figure it out.
Thank you so much. With that, I would welcome.
Vice Chair, can I
thanking.
just say one more
yes,
thing?
Please.
Actually, yeah, sorry
I
to-
think we have a 1-minute warning
Sorry to-
there.
Sorry to dive bomb in here, but I did, staff would be irritated with me if I didn't mention the fact that we're about to invest $500 million in those low-income homes in various parts of the state and priority communities through the Equitable Building Decarb program. And we're going to learn a lot from that. We're going to really learn how to get to scale. So, and bring private capital and all the things we need to do to deal with some of these equity issues that, you rightly pointed out. And that includes keeping 100-amp panels wherever possible. There's a lot of technology that if we can maintain smallish panels and cover all of these loads, it creates fewer problems for the distribution grid and for the CAISO. So that's, I think, one thing we all need to do together.
Thank you so much. I can keep going for another day with you. I love the 4 of you. Thank you for your leadership. And not a lot of times given. Public service is a painful but very satisfying job, especially at this time. So thank you for your service and look forward to the conversations. And please join me in thanking the 4 of them.